Oh, Christmas time, the holiday that starts early November and the radio unapologetically blasting Mariah Carey and Feliz Navidad. Feliz Navidad! The crazy house decorations, snickerdoodle McFlurries, and of course, presents. It's strange how this holiday can be so warm and cold at the same time. We all know deep down what Christmas is about. Family, and just the joy of being surrounded by the people you love. But on the surface level, it's all about that Christmas shopping, trying to think you know a person and guess what they might like. Oh, thank you! A bag of dog shit. My fave? Yet, there was only one person, or rather thing, that hated this aspect of Christmas the most, and his only solution at the time was to take it away from those who enjoyed it the most. In 1957, Dr. Seuss, the well-known creator of beloved rhymes and children's literature, imagined one of the most memorable Christmas stories out there, with a villain as the protagonist. The villagers of a small town called Whoville adored Christmas, but the green yeti monster thing known as the Grinch, living on Mount Crumpet, despised the noise and their overall joy towards the holiday. So after his 53rd year tolerating all this, he decides to steal it. And the concept is just seems laughable at first. I mean, how can you possibly steal a holiday? But he did. The Grinch found a way. He made himself a Santa suit, forced his dog Max to pose as a reindeer, and slid into town in the dead of night, stealing anything that resembled Christmas, and waited at the tip top of the mountain to hear the cries, the wails, the boo-hoos. But he heard none of that. Instead, on Christmas morning, the Who's sang their merry song, giving the Grinch a change of heart that Christmas can't be gift wrapped or delivered or bought, and maybe, just maybe, it might be a little something more. The illustrations in the original book does a wonderful job telling the story, and the writing itself is lyrical and rolls off the tongue well. There's not much that surprised me since I have watched many interpretations of this concept, but what I didn't actually know was this Grinch's reason for hating Christmas. The narrator doesn't give any specifics in the beginning, but it's revealed at the end once the Who starts singing and the Grinch is completely puzzled. It came without ribbons, it came without tags, it came without packages, boxes, or bags. For me, that tiny piece of dialogue captured exactly what message Dr. Seuss wanted to deliver. When you put aside all the gift giving and materialistic aspects, you're left with the true nature of Christmas. And that's one thing I'll say about the Grinch adaptations before we dive deep into them. Everyone's got their own interpretation on how to tell and change the story for future generations, and each one definitely has their strengths and weaknesses, but they continue to share that same message of what Christmas truly means. And that makes me happy. I'm glad knowing that his message is still going strong to this day. Now, without further ado, let's see how this green humbug evolved over the years. Did you know? Chuck Jones, the man behind those Looney Tunes cartoons, worked with Dr. Seuss during World War II. They were responsible for those private snafu cartoons that educated and boosted troop morale about the risk and safety tips for war. They had history, and when Seuss wrote The Grinch, I guess Chuck wanted to turn into a TV special in time for the holidays. Dr. Seuss was a little hesitant though, since his considered failure on the 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, but he eventually agreed, probably because he worked with Chuck before, and now it is considered a classic holiday tradition alongside Rudolph and A Charlie Brown Christmas. This version of the story is what the future adaptations take from because of how impactful it was during its time. This special brought us the song You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch. That whole scene of the Grinch saving the sleigh from falling off Mount Crumpet was due to this special. And sadly, the birth of dog abuse on poor Max came from this too. But don't feel too bad, he gets his well-deserved reward by the end, like a good boy. It follows the original to a T, adding just a few short scenes like the ones I just mentioned to fit the runtime. I mean, at one point, the Grinch stops stealing Christmas and it's just stealing. Ice cubes, light bulbs, even petals off a potted plant, and it works. You just needed half an hour to tell the story. Half an hour, and the message comes across so well. The animation is also good, especially when it depicts the Grinch's unlikeliness. The crooks in his teeth, all of his disappointed frowns and snarls, and possibly the best sinister face ever drawn on the Grinch. Looking at this gives me chills because you know that whatever he's scheming, it's bad. Oh, it's bad. That face says it all. It's a short, sweet special that really says all it needs to say about the Grinch and his despicable plan on Whoville. and a couple decades later, studios believed it was time to bring him back for the year 2000. And boy, was it controversial. Oh, the internet has been trying to convince me that this is a terrible movie. I have seen reviews that wanted me to call it a sin among sins. But I cannot lie, I enjoyed this film. I enjoyed it back when I was a kid and appreciate it even more watching it back for this review. Sue me. Now, is it a faithful adaptation of the book? Hell to the no. The Who's in this one are straight up jerks. In the book, they were very one-dimensional and seemed cheerful and jolly 24/7, which the Grinch absolutely loathed. But in this version, there's foul play on both sides, especially when we get a glimpse of the Grinch's backstory and how he was mocked as a child for being different. Dude, there's one scene with the Grinch sending jury duty through the mail. It's probably for the sake of the joke, but you can't help but imagine what a Who courtroom looks like. I'm so curious as to what qualifies as a Who crime. Stealing Christmas? Definitely top priority. Now, is it the prettiest film to look at? I mean, I enjoy the set designs in this film. Like the interior of the Grinch's house on Mount Crumpet is very creative, and certain scenes really give the aesthetic of the film a unique look. Even the camera helps in creating these weird perspective and angles that make the movie more cartoonish and goofy for kids to enjoy. It's really just the coloring that's upsetting. I don't know if it's because Whoville literally takes place inside a snowflake, but it's not as jolly as it could be. It just needed that movie magic to really highlight the feeling of Christmas, like the warm sunrise near the end. So now we ask, what worked? Well, for starters, Jim Carrey. I don't think anyone else could have done it better like him, and I'm not speaking purely out of nostalgia. There are moments in the film where it becomes a little exhausting to watch, even the few awkward scenes that just have him standing in silence with no direction, but for the most part, his performance was entertaining. He's despicable, he's an arsonist. Even as a child, he was eating glass and playing with welding tools. The Who's may have picked on him, but he wasn't an easygoing guy to begin with. When he's nominated as the holiday cheermeister, the only reason he goes into town is to rub it in everyone's faces. His actions are spiteful and driven with the motive to ruin everything in his path, which is what I expect from someone who really hates Christmas. I believe that he really wants to ruin Christmas, just like the original. Also, the humor in this is pretty hit and miss. There's no doubt that most of the comedy comes from the writing and dialogue, but then you have Carrey's improvisational skills that are hilarious. There's one scene where he's getting dressed for the jubilation and magically takes the tablecloth without disturbing the junk, but then immediately knocks it all down like the way it was supposed to be. I'm also okay with how the Who's are portrayed. It felt very realistic to how people are when it comes to the holidays, and focused more on the commercial side of this story. Cindy Lou Who wasn't just different because of her nose, but because she was the only one who realized that something happened to Christmas. Over the years, it just got so competitive, manufactured. So by the end, it's not just the Grinch who realizes that there's something more to Christmas than gifts, but the Who's as well. And on some level, it becomes a lesson that we can all relate to from both fronts. This movie has its problems, I know. Some of the designs are nightmare fuel. How can this be for kids with the mass amount of adult humor plugged in? And yet, I still found myself liking this even after all these years. Jim Carrey may be the only reason this movie succeeded, but maybe that's all you needed. As long as you have a solid Grinch, the rest doesn't matter. With that said, oh my god, look how wonderful this looks! The Who's, the trees, the hills, the snows. Say what you will about Illumination, but when it comes to these Seuss films, it's like stepping into his universe. I can feel every creative idea pouring through the frames. This was the Winter Wonderland Ron Howard wished he had in his movie. But looks can be deceiving, and beyond the image of this movie, everything else is pretty average. First, let's talk about the Grinch and the fact that he doesn't feel like a Grinch. His anger towards the people in the holiday has been severely diluted to the point where he's just an average jerk. He also lives among the Who's, which is strange. I don't think the Grinch in the original ever went down the mountain. Jim Carrey's Grinch was traumatized from ever coming back and would rather eat their garbage than take another step to the village. Despite having his own questionable backstory, this Grinch tortures himself coming down to a Whole Foods for grocery shopping. He puts himself through all this noise and jolly he supposedly hates so much. Now I know why people call him a tsundere. It's so obvious that he wants to love Christmas, but can't allow himself to do it because he's a wounded soul and doesn't want to open that can of trauma ever again. Hashtag relatable. For an animated film, it's pretty slow moving too. If I wasn't getting much humor from the dialogue, then I was hoping for some fast-paced shenanigans when planning for the Christmas heist, but it moves realistically, which is the last thing I expect from a Grinch cartoon. It feels like I'm watching Wile E. Coyote plans executed at .25 speed. So my impression now is that the Grinch is much tamer, and the movement is at such a steady snail's pace that none of these fictional animated characters can be exaggerated and fun. Sometimes it works, like the carolers cornering the Grinch. I thought that was hilarious, the way they were singing and snapping closer and closer like a Christmas gang, but that was one of the few times. And one of the few things I can actually remember. I'm recording this almost a week after watching, and the things that come to mind are Fred, a screaming goat, I think a Minion cameo, and waffles. Even the narration, which I never thought I would have to question, was a little off. I legit thought they got Michael B. Jordan to narrate the story, and when I learned it was Pharrell Williams, I was even more disappointed. This man's a singer. Why does his narration sound so flat and lack any emphasis or emotion towards the rhymes? And lastly, the changes with Cindy Lou's side of the story. I thought it was okay. Personally, I thought it would have been stronger if her personality was similar to how the Grinch was when he was a kid, and that would be the connecting bridge to heal his heart because he would know the pain and wouldn't want her to go through the same trauma. But this wild child was alright too. She definitely had more of a personality than the previous Cindys, and still retained her pure intentions when all she wanted for Christmas was to make her mom's life a little easier. And yeah, those scenes with Cindy and her mom were the strongest points in the film. Without much said, you can clearly see her mom trying her best to take care of her kids, and when Cindy admits that it might be her fault Christmas got ruined because of her trap, her mom relieves her of that guilt and tells her that Christmas is something that can't be stolen. In all honesty, this movie has its moments, especially the ending. The Grinch has his change of heart, returns the stuff, and admits his faults. He goes back to his lonely house on the mountain until Cindy Lou stops by and invites him to Christmas dinner, making him feel part of the community and filling that void he's been avoiding for so long. Now that's sweet. Safe and sweet is what this movie is. It might have played it a little too safe in terms of the Grinch, but in return, it did make him more relatable to people who might feel like an outcast around everyone else. I think that was the intention. They stopped with the dog abuse and made Max his only friend in the world because sometimes it just be like that, you know? In my mind, I saw potential in certain scenes to make it more funny or impactful, but it is what it is. Another interpretation. So with 3 different interpretations, there's enough variations of the Grinch to satisfy the whole world. If you haven't checked out the 30-minute TV special, I highly recommend it. It is considered the best for a reason. It tells the whole story in its entirety without much extra filler, has a killer song, and still remains one of those Christmas classics. Personally, Jim Carrey's Grinch will always be one of my favorite Christmas movies, and knowing how agonizing it was for production, I respect his efforts much more. It wasn't animated, and yet his performance and quick wit felt like it could be a cartoon. If you're looking for a Grinch that's not afraid to be a little extra, check this one out. And with the latest Grinch movie, it's harmless. That's my best description for it. An appropriate film for kids that won't have him burning trees, but I'm curious whether they'll find it entertaining like the previous adaptations. It was good for a one-time watch, but I just need something with a little more substance. But whichever version suits you best, let's all remember that the message wasn't lost after all these years. It's not about the gifts, but the joy of giving gifts and giving to those you have loved and cherished for another glorious year. So happy holidays, folks. Don't be a Grinch. Your internet friend, Mike.